Thank you so much. Thanks for that. Good morning, Register, and thank you so much to all of you for coming out here today. When I did my announcement speech in Boston a couple of months ago, I talked about how my purpose in running was to challenge the corrupt merger of state and corporate power, which was strip mining the American people and destroying the American middle class, strip mining them of their equity, their wealth, and ultimately their democracy. I'm going to try, if I got the time, to talk about 3 examples of how that's happening, how that's impacting Iowa and the people of Iowa directly and the surrounding states. I want to start by saying I was in Manchester, New Hampshire 3 days ago, opening our headquarters up there. And the last kid to come up to me in line to take his picture with me said to me, "I've never voted in an election. I'm working for you here because I want to have pride in my country and I want to have hope for my future." And he is worried. He's worried that he's never going to own a home. Home prices have increased during these past 2 presidencies from $200,000 average home to $415,000. And the interest rates are now going up 5 times. So he's paying 10 times what kids were paying 5 or 6 years ago for the same home. And he's worried he will never be able to afford it. He's worried that he's not going to be able to pay off his student loans. He's paying 7 times what I paid in real dollar for my education. And he's worried that he's going to carry that burden into his late adulthood. And today, 57% of the people in this country are not making enough money to pay for basic human needs. That's food, shelter, and transportation. I spend a lot of time in the middle part of this country representing people. I'm representing 1,000 families in Columbiana County, Ohio, whose lives were upended by the Norfolk Southern spill. I'm seeing Americans live at a level of desperation, of depression, that I never thought I'd see in this country, that I associated with Latin America when I was a boy. The average income now in America is 5,000 times less, the average income, $5,000 less than the cost of basic human needs. And that's why over the past, and 35% of the people in this country are no longer making enough money to pay for those needs. In order to bridge that gap, that $5,000 gap, people are putting their debt on their credit card. And the credit card rates, the credit card debt, personal debt, this week, for the first time in history, exceeded $1 trillion. And people are paying an average of 22% interest on that debt. If the mafia did that to you, it'd be called loan sharking. But if the banks do it, it's business as usual. And those banks are owned primarily by 3 companies, BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard. So they are now, and over the past year, we've lost 700,000 homeowners in this country. Those homes were bought up by those companies. And that's more homes than we lost in 2008 during the great mortgage crisis the year before, in 2021. We lost 700,000 homes that are now owned by those companies. So homeowner land, those people are now moved to rentals. And the rentals are going up because of the pressure from those home ownership. We're seeing the land in this country, literally the equity that you need to borrow money, Americans need to borrow money to build businesses, is being strip mined away from them. Here in this state, half the farmland is now owned by non-farm companies, and it's being purchased up again. A lot of those companies are BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard, and Smithfield. Smithfield, I spent 15 years suing in North Carolina. They invented a new way, they built a slaughterhouse, invented a new way of slaughtering hogs. They went into business with Wendell Murphy. They dropped the price of pork from 65 cents a pound to 2 cents a pound. It cost the farmer at that point 35 cents a pound to raise a hog to kill weight. And they took over the whole hog industry. They put out of business 28,000 hog farmers in North Carolina. They replaced those with 2,200 factories, 80% of them owned by one, owned or operated or contracted to one company. Oh, and today, virtually 100% of hog production in the state of Iowa is owned by that company, by Smithfield or by Bruce Renstetter. So you have the opposite of what Thomas Jefferson said was necessary for us maintaining our democracy, which is that our landscapes would be left in the hands of thousands, tens of thousands of independent yeoman farmers, each with a stake in our system of government. We now have a colonial system here in Iowa and around the country, where the land base is owned by a corporate aristocracy, a corporate kleptocracy, who is using their control of land to control the politics and to strip mine the wealth from the public. So this boy said to me, I want to be proud of our country. When I was a boy, I knew that the United States of America was the best country in the world. We have been blessed by God. I grew up in a period that is called by social scientists and economists the Great Prosperity, a 50-year period following World War II. When I grew up in the 60s, my uncle was president. We had created the American middle class, the greatest generator of wealth in the history of mankind. We owned half the wealth on the face of the earth in our country. When I traveled abroad with my parents, which I did often, people would come up and say, I'll do anything to get your blue jeans. Look, American blue jeans, American automobiles, transistor radios, RCA Victrolas, all of these American products, we invented them, we made them, and everybody in the world wanted them. When I went to Poland as a boy, it was a communist country. The communists didn't want anybody to know that we were there. My father went there against without any invitation. They blanked us out in the newspapers. We went one day to visit the Cathedral of the Black Maria in Krakow. There was nobody in the square when we went in, and there was no newspaper notices. We went to meet the cardinal, who was a saint, who was a living saint. He had stood up to the communists. He had endured torture in prison. And we spent 4 hours with him. And when we walked out, there was 1 million people waiting for us in that square. They surrounded our car. My father stood on top with 3 of my 10, I think, that time siblings, and myself. And I was a 12-year-old kid, and I signed autographs for an hour. And I saw the people with tears coming down their face, the electric response of the crowd, because people all over the world love the United States of America. And one of the reasons they loved us so much was because we had avoided going to war. My uncle had told his best friend, Ben Bradley, the principal job, Ben Bradley asked him, what do you want in your gravestone? And he said, he kept the peace. He said, the principal job of an American president is to keep the country out of war. He said, I don't want African children and Latin American children and Asian children, when they think of the United States, to think of a man in a military uniform with a gun. I want them to think of a Peace Corps volunteer. I want them to think of the Kennedy Milk Program, the Alliance for Progress, the USAID, which at that time was actually trying to build middle classes in those countries. We want to put America on the side of the poor. Because of that, there's more statues today of John F. Kennedy, more avenues named after him, more boulevards in the capitals of Latin America, Africa, and Asia than any other U.S. president. But he managed to keep this country. He never sent a single combat troop abroad to die. He sent 15,000 advisors to Vietnam a month before he died. He found out 75 Green Berets had died, and he ordered them all home. October 22nd, 1963, he signed National Security Order 263, ordering all troops home from Vietnam. A month later, he was murdered. A week after that, LBJ remanded that order, and we have become a warfare state. Now, I have a friend who's one of my best friends, who's a commercial fisherman. And I've represented for most of my career as an environmentalist, commercial fishermen on the Hudson and on waterways all across the country, litigating against polluters. Well, my friend worked his whole life in the commercial fishing industry. His son-in-law now owns the company, but he doesn't have a pension. Because it's a hard job, like farming, he's on 100% disability. He relies on food stamps. He got $283 a month in food stamps. But because of paying for the war, the $8 trillion that we've spent on wars, all lost since 2000, the inflation rate is devouring his food stamps. So we've had supposedly 38% increase in food costs over the past 2 years, but the real increase of food stuff, of basic foods like chicken, eggs, and dairy is 78%. So his food stamp is 78% less than it was 2.5 years ago. Well, on March 1st of this year, he got a robocall from the government telling him that his food stamp is being cut to $23 a month. He was already down to 1 meal a day. And 30 million Americans got that call. 15 million Americans were told they were being cut from Medicare that month. That month, we sent over $113 billion. We topped it off, topped our commitment, $113 billion to Ukraine. So, and that same month, the Fed printed $300 billion unanticipated to pay for the bailout of the Silicon Valley Bank. So we have a lot of money when we need it for the bankers or when we need it for the war machine, but we don't have it when we need it for regular Amerians. That's right. Now, Mitch McConnell was asked about $130 billion. If you kept it here, we won't have to cut $1 from Medicare or food stamps. And he said, don't worry, because it's not really going to Ukraine. It's really all just going to U.S. military contractors, Raytheon, General Dynamics, Boeing, Lockheed, and the other ones. Well, who owns those companies? 100% of them. BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street. And if you look at the generals who are on TV telling us the narrative for the Ukraine war, which is complete baloney, if you actually look at the way they work, they're retired generals who are now working for those companies. So this is another way they strip mine the country. I'm going to ask Dennis Kucinich to come up here and make one little other point. He's like my Vanna White. So I'm going to tell you the biggest boondoggle of it all. These pipelines that are now planned for the state of Iowa, these are not oil pipelines. These are carbon pipelines that are taking carbon from ethanol plants and supposedly, and then they're bringing them supposedly for deep well injection. But if you look at this plant, which is owned, these pipelines, which are owned by Bruce Rassegger, these plants end in North Dakota near the Bakken well sites. But North Dakota has said you can't do deep well injection here. So we know what they're really doing is they're using this to extract more oil from those sites by pumping the wells. The same thing is true of this one. It ends right next to, and this one is owned by BlackRock. And it ends right next to the southern Illinois, south of Springfield oil field. So that's what they're really up to. This is just a huge subsidy to the oil industry. How much is it worth to the oil industry? Over a 12-year period, $173 billion in taxpayer subsidies. These are very, very dangerous pipelines. 80% of the people in Iowa do not want these pipelines. 45 of the 56 counties through which they go have said we don't want them and have protested to the Iowa Utility Board. But guess what? The Iowa Utility Board is appointed by the governor, who has taken 163 million or 163,000 from Bruce Rasslinger, and who then appointed the two controlling members of that board who fast-tracked this project. So this is a project that the people of this state don't want, and is going to bankrupt our country, $173 billion. And that is very, very dangerous, because the carbon, when it's liquefied, turns highly acidic, and it corrodes the pipe. And if it gets, so they have to use special, very expensive pipe that is coated with chrome. But there's still leaks. And when they leak, the people who are affected can very easily die. So in 2020, they did the first one of these, did a big leak near Biloxi, Mississippi. 49 people in the town were hospitalized. Some of those people have brain damage from which they will never recover. The ambulances and first responders that came to the site, their engines froze because there was no oxygen at ground level, and they couldn't, their internal combustion engines failed. So they're endangering the people of Iowa. They are making billions of dollars for the oil industry and for big ag. And they're doing this by changing the law to allow themselves the power of eminent domain. Because these farmers do not want the line going through their fields. So they have taken the power of eminent domain. The Fifth Amendment of the Constitution says that the government cannot take your land without due process and just compensation, and they can only take it for a public purpose. Yes. But this is not a public purpose. This is a private, profit-making purpose. And the only way they're getting away with this is by using a campaign finance system that is just a system of legalized bribery. Yes! This is supposed to help with climate change by isolating carbon. Two things about that. All of the Republicans in this state who are supporting this and who have taken money from Mr. Bruce don't believe in climate change. So why are they supporting this pipeline? Number two, the pipeline doesn't work. It doesn't. We know that because ADM, which has another one, a third of these pipelines, there's 3,000 miles of them altogether. ADM, which is building the Wolf pipeline over here, has another one that it built in 2017 in Illinois, and it's only succeeded in capturing 3% of the carbon from that company. So we know it doesn't work. We know the whole thing is a boondoggle. It was put into the law by oil industry lobbyists who want another subsidy for the carbon industry. We now give this country, we pay $5.2 trillion a year in subsidies to the carbon industry. Well, this is just more of the same. And this is a classic boondoggle by which these big shots, BlackRock, Vanguard, Smithfield, and which is also partners on one of these projects, are getting control of their land.